Production underwriting for Ruckus has been made possible in part by the generous contributions from Fred and Lou Hartwig and from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Ruckus, our weekly food for thought fight over the news of the day and the trends of the times. I'm Mike Shannon, joined by the Ruckettes, Kansas City Star editorial writer Yael Abu-Haka, Gwen Grant, president and CEO of the Kansas City Urban League, media and communications consultant Mary O'Halloran. Joining us this week, attorney Steve Marakian with the firm of Wersch, Hobbs and Marakian. After about a year of study, the mayor's KCI advisory group offers this advice: dump the present airport and build a new one, a one-terminal facility. Let's get some quick reactions now from the panel, starting with Yael.
Good decision. We'll see what the next year and a half brings as the airlines and the aviation department really debate what a new terminal could look like, how much it would cost, and of course, we know we'll pay for it.
Mary.
Not surprising, but it doesn't reflect what the people of Kansas City think at all.
Gwen?
Well, I somewhat agree with Mary on that. And, you know, I think that going forward, they will certainly need to demonstrate how we can maintain the conveniences as well as how they address the cost factor.
Steve.
I like the existing airport, but I'm going to keep an open mind, and I want to see the financial reports.
Much more about this topic next week on Ruckus. Gleeful critics abound as the Kansas governor faces mounting criticism for the state's financial problems, a downgraded bond rating from Moody's, and a budget projection for April falling $92 million short. In fact, Democrats are already practicing saying, Governor Davis. But GOP leaders say, not so fast. 1 month's revenues do not a budget year make, and it takes time for Brownback-supported tax cuts to take hold and generate increased revenues. Plus, the sluggish national economy and the myriad impacts of Obamacare take a toll on state revenues. I'm fairly certain Mary, Yael, and Gwen will speak with one voice on this issue, so let's start with Steve. From your standpoint, how's Brownback's situation?
Well, it certainly could be better. I don't think it's anywhere near as grim as some on the Democratic side would like to portray it, and they are gleeful about this. I think the problem is not so much the question of the Kansas finances, which will sort themselves out one way or the other. The problem is for Davis in this sense. In order to win, it's demographics and it's economics. And he's going to have to get a very substantial portion of Johnson County Republicans in order to win this race, because he's not going to get the outstate Republicans. The problem he's got is that though there are some Republicans who are concerned, such as me, about the question of these tax cuts, most Republicans favor the tax cuts, and most Republicans favor what happened with the school plan. Davis can't run against the school plan because Johnson County loves it, and I guarantee you he's not going to run saying, I'm running and I'm going to raise your taxes.
Don't you find it interesting, after all this criticism of what's happening in Kansas, the Missouri legislature overrode the governor's veto and agreed to lower tax rates, lower income tax rates in Missouri?
Well, yeah, I mean, there really is something in the water, especially with the Republicans who think cutting taxes will lead to more jobs and all that.
Maybe it's not water.
And I'm working on an editorial that basically shows factually that's not true. Well, it should be in the Star this weekend. But I mean, I think Steve makes a good point on the demographics. Paul Davis will have to say, okay, we know this tax cut at least so far is not working, and there's still, 4, 5, 6 months until the election, so a lot of things could happen. But we know the tax cuts are not working as the shot to the heart for the economy or for jobs. So what are you going to do about it, Mr. Davis? Are you going to rescind the tax cut? I think that's going to be a legitimate attack from Republicans. But one more thing on Johnson County. Steve, let's not really underestimate the intelligence of Johnson County residents. When November comes along and they're looking at it going, well, you know what, this really is not working, they may vote for Davis.
Here's the problem. Mike, I haven't talked to a Democrat who's excited. I've talked to a lot of Democrats who are frightened, because they know that Brownback will never go back on this, and they know that he won't help the state's treasury by taking Obamacare seriously and providing for the expansion of Medicaid for 100,000 Kansans, which would, on the edge of things, at least help a bit. And he's not going to back off, so what is he going to cut? guess what? I mean, if push comes to shove here real quickly, suppose the Supreme Court comes down and says, oh, we're about ready to have that second shoe drop on the education funding. Where will he get the money? We know where he'll get the money. He'll take money out of schools again. He'll take it again out of a social safety net. And nobody's happy about that.
Gwen, we had this report, $92 million short in terms of revenue projections, but is it unusual for a government to be wrong when it forecasts revenues and other things?
By that much,
no,
yes.
No, it's not unusual for governments to be wrong, but Mary's right by that amount. And the important thing is...
Think about deficit projections from the federal government.
The issue here is he projected that this would be a great economic boost for Kansas. It is not. So there are $92 million in the red. How long is that going to go on before you start supposedly seeing this great revenue that he projected? And I think the hole is just going to get deeper and deeper.
Yale, have there been some months, and it seems that there have, where revenue projections were accurate, or the amount coming in exceeded the forecast?
Yes, and let's clarify here. To me, the most important thing that came out was the year-over-year drop, which for Kansas was, according to their figures, 45%. Missouri, it was 5%. A couple other states I checked, it was 3, 5, or 7. In other words, there were some drops because it's national. Obama caused it. Well, there was some truth to that. But it was much, much less in other states. So the actual drop in Kansas year to year was unbelievably bad.
And Yale, that Obama caused it was really something I did hear from Democrats about. That was sophomoric on the part of the governor.
Well, what about this action by Moody's downgrading the credit rating? Didn't that happen to the federal government?
Yeah, it's very insignificant.
Let me tell you, the Kansas. I thought, no, there are 13 other states.
I mean, did you ask me a question?
Sorry, you're right.
Okay. All right. It's very insignificant. It puts Kansas essentially with about 30 other states in terms who do not have the very highest level. It makes very little difference. It can be changed dramatically. It's one of those things where Moody looks at a number of different factors which can change on a dime. And so what happens here is it's going to be a political issue, but we still come back to the basic question. Over the next 2 years, we're going to see whether or not Kansas has to make some adjustments. In this race right now, Davis is going to have to say, okay, I'm going to do something which is going to change Moody's, for example, and he can't say it.
Steve, it makes borrowing on the state's part more expensive.
It's so minimal. It's so minimal, Mary. It's almost nothing.
It looks like efforts are now underway to get an affirmative action amendment on the Missouri ballot following a recent U.S. Supreme Court ruling. In a 6-2 decision, the High Court upheld a Michigan constitutional amendment that prohibits universities from considering race as part of the admissions process. Columnist Charles Krauthammer applauds the decision, writing, "Every once in a while, a great conflicted country gets an insoluble problem exactly right." But Kansas City Star columnist Mary Sanchez has a different view. The court's decision opens the door to voting majorities in other states to reach the same conclusion without considering the historical burdens many minority people still struggle with. Question, Gwen, is there some middle ground anywhere between Krauthammer and Sanchez?
I don't think so. I think they differ on the issue. Krauthammer thinks that you should let the voters decide, let the public decide, that this should not be something that's decided in the courts. And Mary thinks otherwise, and I certainly agree with Mary. I mean, the impetus of affirmative action was to redress the long-term, the issues, the disadvantages associated with overt historical discrimination. That was the impetus for it. And also, it was to ensure that public institutions such as colleges and universities reflected the populations that they serve. And so until we achieve that, we don't need to be fiddling with affirmative action, and we have enough information that shows that these gaps have not been closed. But in this case, is not what the court did was made a decision that really wasn't about the pros and cons of affirmative action, but made a decision about who decides.
Let me put a couple of quotes from 2 Supreme Court justices on the screen, then ask Steve to react to each of them. The first is from Justice Stephen Breyer. I believe he's considered liberal, is he not, Steve?
Only considered liberal. He always votes liberal.
This is what he said. The Constitution foresees the ballot box not the courts, as the normal instrument for resolving differences and debates about the merits of these programs. Is that essentially what Gwen just said? The court's saying, let the people decide.
That's not what Gwen just said, and it's also not what Justice Sotomayor said. And the problem with a lot of the criticism of this opinion is that there are some people who have not read this 116-page opinion, and they have not read either the majority opinion or the dissent. Gwen got it right to this extent, and this is what Justice Sotomayor says, and this is why this is much ado about nothing. Justice Sotomayor doesn't say, okay, what she says is basically the Board of Regents could have done exactly this. I just don't like it when the public gets to vote on this. That's where Justice Breyer...
Let me show you something that...
I've got the opinion. I can quote it. It's right here.
Let me show you something that was quoted by Mary Sanchez in her column from Justice Sotomayor. We ordinarily understand our precedents to mean what they actually say, not what we later think they could or should have said. Is that a fair criticism of the ruling from the justice?
No, it's not only not fair, it's completely wrong. Here's the thing. Justice Sotomayor gave an impassioned defense of affirmative action, and Gwen is right. The problem is this case is not about affirmative action. There's nothing in this opinion that says you can't have affirmative action. What it says
if the people could vote for affirmative
action.
What it says is
you cannot affirmatively discriminate in order to create affirmative action. It doesn't say that people don't have the right to choose in any given state to have racial preferences. They're just not required.
Mary, there have been efforts to get this on the ballot in Missouri before that have failed. Do you think the climate is such now that an initiative petition might succeed? It might get on the ballot?
A court decision could have an effect on that, but I just wanted to add to what Gwen was saying and what I liked about what I read about Justice Sotomayor's decision. First of all, I have to reveal I'm a person that benefited from affirmative action. I was the regional administrator of the U.S. Department of Energy. There were 9 others in the country. They were all men. And I know that I was selected mostly, to great extent, rather, I should say, because he needed some women to serve. Secondly, I used affirmative action when I made appointments and when I chose people off those civil service lists for jobs. And I came to understand and try to explain to people that it is a great American solution to the problem of overcoming the traditional discrimination against minorities.
But Yale, the question arises, will this ever end? I mean, will minorities ever feel they're getting a fair shake by colleges and universities and governmental agencies?
Well, I mean, I don't know about will never end, but it certainly it's certainly not ending right now. But I guess to your ultimate question is, will something go on the ballot in Missouri? It quite possibly could, and it could quite possibly be approved. But I'd like to see what the actual language is. I do kind of agree with Steve to this degree that, and I'm not going to say it's much about nothing, but it is focused on something that is not well, you know, we can't ever give blacks or minorities or anything any kind of preference at all. That's not what the decision said.
I also understand that this affects other government programs in Michigan. You can't use race as an affirmative aspect of hiring, for example.
But Yale's absolutely right. You have to read the opinion carefully. You can't just read what somebody else wrote about the opinion. What they're saying is, they're not saying you cannot have affirmative action. They're saying you're not required to have it, and we can vote and say we don't want it to be there.
All right, I think we're through with that discussion. The Kansas City Zoo is trying to ensure that free days don't turn out to be free-for-all days. In the last couple of years, large crowds on a couple of the free days led to some fights, a gunshot or two, at least one arrest, and luckily no serious injuries. Voters in Jackson and Clay counties were promised 4 free days annually if they okayed a special sales tax to benefit the zoo. They did and are normally eager to take advantage of the bonus visits. It appears a system has now been devised that officials hope will solve the problems. How is the plan supposed to work, and do you think it will? Yale.
Yes, I do think it will work. This is one of those issues you just step back and go, what the hell? Because at the end of the day, you're going to get something in the mail if you live in Jackson and Clay County. You're going to get basically coupons for 3 more free days at the zoo. You bring your ID there, and you can get in as an adult if you're bringing some kids and all that kind of stuff. So all that makes sense. And I do think the zoo absolutely had to keep its promise, its pledge, to Jackson counties and Clay counties, who approved a sales tax increase for the zoo, millions of dollars a year. The zoo is getting better. It's offering amenities that it never offered before. It's having attendance that it's never had before, record attendance. This is something I've been writing about since 1990, so 24 years, and I really think the zoo is on a positive path. So to have something like the fights break out, shots fired, is very negative attention. But I will say, and one final comment from me is, the zoo is extremely resilient in the minds of Kansas Cityans now, because not just 2 days after the incident, more than 10,000 people show up at the zoo, so they're not scared to go to the
You pointed that out before, that having a big crowd doesn't mean
I
big
think
trouble.
this plan will work. It makes sense. It's going to cost a little extra money. And yes, it will actually make you responsible for keeping track of where your
Here's something I thought was interesting. To take advantage of the free day to gain admission to the zoo, you have to either produce a utility bill or a photo ID. It is harder to get into the zoo, Steve, than it is to cast a ballot.
Cannot go to the zoo, Mike.
Come on.
Actually,
Well, that's true. It's true. You have to have a photo ID or a utility bill.
have identification to vote.
Well, the story says a utility bill or
you have to have something like that to
photo
register in
ID,
Missouri.
but not to vote.
Well, no, in Missouri you do. Yale.
You do?
No, you don't have to have photo ID.
You do in Kansas.
When you register,
Kansas.
you do.
All right.
Yes.
The zoo, Mary.
Wait, somebody has to ask me a question.
You know, I think the interesting question about this situation is not so much zoo management and can they figure out whether to give coupons or how to divvy this all up. But the real problem here is that we have large crowds going to other places. We have big crowds. The question was, this was free. And because it was free, it attracted groups of young people who are probably very similar in demographic to those young people that are causing problems on the plaza or other places where fun is free. And we're getting representatives of some gang activity, and we're getting representatives of an age group that is armed when they go have fun. And that's the problem, and that's the police department's problem, not the zoo's
You happy
problem.
with this solution, Gwen?
Yeah, I think it was.
You know, it's a tentative solution. It may be changed. We're
Yeah,
told.
maybe change, but I think it was a good move. I think they're keeping their promises, Yale said, and they're managing the crowd. I mean, it's really about crowd control. You had way too many people show up on that day than they could handle. Along in that crowd was, some miscreants, and there you go. So you had all that come together and create a problem. But I think this is a great solution.
But it wasn't so much they couldn't handle the crowd, it was that some members of the crowd were out of control and not willing to be appropriately behaved.
But a large crowd
Right.
contributes to that.
Right, and Gwen makes a
But
good
not
point.
necessarily, as you pointed out.
True, but what is going to happen is that actually on these days of free, you're not going to have that large crowd of like-minded people who want to go cause problems.
Yeah, the number of free people will be controlled on any given day.
But you can have a sparse crowd and
Take
have
your
five
photo
groups.
ID, but don't worry about it at the ballot box. When you hear talk about urban density, it's not about how smart or dumb a city is. It's about the number of people inhabiting a specific geographic area. Looking at downtown Kansas City, Star columnist Steve Paul worries that we're still a long way from the kind of density that will serve to electrify the city because there are many stretches of the day when parts of downtown still feel underpopulated and underused. Paul hopes the planned construction of a 25-story luxury apartment building downtown, the first in nearly 40 years, will help. While acknowledging the past problems, Paul seems encouraged by current trends. His column is headlined, "Slowly but Unmistakably, Downtown Kansas City Rises Again." Did Mr. Paul's headline writer get it right, Mary?
Yes, and with the same poetics, panache.
That was a good column, wasn't it?
Oh my God! I love great writing, and Steve Paul is so good at writing. It had a little Carl Sandburg opening
columnists.
to it. He's standing on the Liberty Memorial, and the fog is thick, rolling in, but he sees the skyscrapers. Oh, Lord, Steve, if you like romantic reporting, it was good. You ought to read it.
I did.
So his concern is about, is there enough density? And the whole wonderful essay is written around his going to the ribbon cutting for the new 25-story, $78 million rental not so much rental as luxury living spaces. And he writes about that, and he throws in a little history about how things used to be and so on. But his only real criticism of downtown is that sometimes there are not enough. The intensity of the density.
Well, he says the skyscrapers are wonderful, but down close to the ground, it's not so active.
And so density is the problem.
Yeah.
If that's the case, it's moving to be fixed.
Okay, well, as long as we're praising star columnists here, I remember 15 years ago when I wrote that the single most important thing downtown was getting people down there, and of course everybody agreed. I mean, I was not the only person saying downtown council. That was a big thing. That was before Sprint Center and before the Power and Light District, but it was let's get activity. Let's get people who care about downtown and live there. We're not going to get 50,000, but let's get 10, 20, 30. And we're on the way. And Steve is absolutely right. The density there is not nearly what it could be, should be, and actually will be as some of these other projects are finished. I was driving on yesterday, and I can't be poetic about it, but large stretches, just a block or two from City Hall, they're just vacant ground, just sitting there, nothing there. So that's not good, but there's a way to go, but it is positive, yes.
Well, I drove through downtown Kansas City yesterday and asked my wife, how do you define downtown? What is downtown? Do we all agree on the boundaries of downtown?
For some people, it's the plaza to the river.
Right.
But I think there are two things that are happening down there that are really exciting. Number one is what Google's doing in the crossroads with business. A lot of attention hasn't been paid to this. There's so many business to fiber usage. You know, there's not a lot of usage of Google in business around the city. It's going to happen, and that's going to attract businesses that use a lot of big data. Secondly, there's an announcement that's going to be made Monday at 8 o'clock by the Chancellor of the University of Missouri-Kansas City about some very exciting news that will have a lot to do with increasingly invigorating downtown, and then those that are observing.
Just release the information.
Well, what is it?
Was that not
Well, I don't know.
move?
People are guessing. It's been put out in the press about what time the announcement is. That it may be positive news about the move of the conservatory downtown.
Steve, you're downtown much of the time at your office. Well, some of the time. I know you don't have to go in very often. But in my drive downtown yesterday, the most remarkable thing to me was the tracks being installed and the way that screws up traffic patterns.
Yeah, well, that's going to be an annoyance. But again, I supported the trolley situation, the rail system, whatever it is. I'd like the idea of this new high-rise being built there. I can remember the days, I've gone through these days, when there was nothing downtown. And we'd come out at lunchtime and walk, and there was just a few restaurants, and nobody was down. It was like a ghost town. Now, I've always been a big proponent of the Sprint Center and the Entertainment District, despite some of the fiscal worries, because I think it draws people there. I love the idea of trying to redevelop it. It gives us better tax base. I just think it gives a more vibrant city.
Okay, it is time now for the ever-popular, totally unpredictable Roast and Toast segment, where each Ruckhead has the soapbox for 30 seconds, or however long it takes to run out of breath. The clock starts now, and we start with Steve.
This week, the president released an absurd climate change report that is more chock full of hyperbolic doomsday predictions than the book of Revelations. Even if human activity contributes to climate change cycles, which it probably does, what the report studiously ignores is two scientific facts. First, the U.S. could do away with all of its factories and all of its cars, and it would hardly make a dent on environmental problems. And second, the president's new regulations will definitely hurt the poor and the middle class by making life harder and more expensive. When the president and Michelle give up their car and their air conditioner, I will.
Gwen.
I'm going to do a special toast today to my 89-year-old mom in celebration of Mother's Day this week, and to all the mothers, grandmothers, and great-grandmothers out there who go far above who work really, really hard and contribute so much to their families and their community. Thank you so much. Love you, Mom.
Well, a big toast to everybody that left their homes, let's see, it would be 2 days ago now, to go down to Jeff City and to rally. Faith, usually they were ministers and people who were in their congregations, to put on a really well-done protest at the Capitol in the state of Missouri against a state and the state legislators that will not expand Medicaid for people in the state. a situation that is going to affect 300,000 people. Isn't it interesting that the same week that they cut taxes for Rex Singfield, they refused to do one single thing, and that is to allow people, and by the way, 20% of those people are people in their 50s who can't yet get on Medicare and are at work.
Well, this is a roast to all you people out there who call KU coach Bill Self a spoil sport, a jerk, and stuff like that. Oh, wait, that's me. Well, actually, let's praise Bill Self and KU's basketball program today, because for the 7th straight year, they've actually had, athletes who go to class, at least according to the NCAA. And, that is one of those things that all people get irritated about these days when all this big money is around sports. They're really supposed to be going to class, most of them, and getting education, and it's good to a small degree that the KU basketball team is doing that, so congratulations.
And finally, here's a toast to Wyandotte County Commissioner Ann Murguia, who took the time to call me and share her thoughts about some of my recent roasts on Ruckus. She was polite and thoughtful, and while we did not arrive at complete accord, I certainly got a better understanding of her views, and I trust she understands my perspective more clearly. Her efforts represent what should be the norm for elected officials, but too often is not. And that's it for this week. Ruckus returns next Thursday evening at 7:30. So now for Yale, Gwen, Mary, Steve, and the rest of the Ruckus crew, Mike Shannon saying thanks for watching and good night.